Okay, get ready, because today we're going deep, really deep, into something you might never have thought twice about. Like, why are our bodies symmetrical on the outside, but when you look inside, it's total chaos?
Yeah, it's like we're symmetrical until you get to the good stuff.
Exactly. And this paper you sent in, all about how embryos develop left-right asymmetry, well, let's just say it blew our minds a little bit. I mean, we all know left versus right, right? Seems like the most basic thing in the world.
You think so, wouldn't you?
But when you think about it, your heart's on the left, liver's on the right, even our brains are lopsided. It's like, how did anyone figure this out?
It's honestly incredible how recent this research is. For the longest time, it was one of those big mysteries in biology.
So how does this even work? Like, picture it. A tiny clump of cells, fresh off the cellular assembly line. How do they know which way is left and which way is right? What's the secret code?
Well, it's a much trickier problem than you'd think. You see, with something like head to tail or front to back development, there are molecular kind of signposts, if you will, gradients that tell a cell where it is in space.
Okay, so like a set of directions.
Kind of, but for left and right, no such compass when you're in the womb. So scientists had to get creative.
And they did, right? Where did they even start with this?
This paper takes us on a wild ride, but you'd never believe where they started. Sea urchins.
Sea urchins, seriously, those spiky little ocean dwellers? I mean, no offense to sea urchins.
None taken, I think. But yeah, they might not be known for their complex anatomy, but even sea urchins have some left-right asymmetry.
Okay, I'll bite.
And the crazy part is, some of the same genes that control that process in sea urchins, we've got them too.
Wait, so we've got sea urchins to thank for our wonky organs? That's both amazing and kind of disturbing at the same time.
In a way, yeah. It really highlights how evolution works. Those basic mechanisms for setting up left versus right are ancient, way older than we thought, back when life was just starting to figure out this whole multicellular thing.
Wow. Talk about a long legacy. So we've got ancient sea urchins setting the stage for our internal asymmetry, but it's not like evolution just said it and forgot it, right?
You got it. Evolution's always tinkering. This paper details how those genes have been remixed and repurposed over millions of years. So even though the basics are old, different animals have their own unique solutions, if that makes
It's
sense.
like specialized asymmetry for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. And the paper uses a really cool example to show how important, but also how flexible this left-right stuff is. A creature called Amphioxus. Yeah,
Amphioxus, that rings a bell. It's like a fish ancestor, right?
kind of a living fossil, yeah. And it turns out Amphioxus shows signs of left-right asymmetry too.
So asymmetry was already happening way, way back then, even before things had proper organs and whatnot.
Hundreds of millions of years back. It's incredible. It means that basic toolkit was in place before our ancestors even looked like, well, anything we'd recognize.
Okay, so asymmetry. It's old, it's important, but clearly evolution kept messing with it. And speaking of messing with things, this paper, it dives into some wild experiments that really show how crucial this whole left-right business is. And the frog experiments, those were my favorite.
Ah, yes, the case of Xenopus, the frog that could have its organs flipped, just like that, with a single injection. Pretty wild stuff.
Okay, so picture this, right? Researchers, they're trying to figure out how genes influence development, and they've got this technique down where they can inject specific proteins into these frog embryos.
It's like high-stakes molecular surgery, but on a microscopic level.
Exactly. And they find this protein called VG1, which is a big player in this whole left-right development thing. But here's where it gets crazy. If they inject VG1 on the wrong side of the embryo,
You essentially hit the mirror image button.
a frog with its heart on the right and its liver on the left.
You got it. A total organ flip. It's like flipping a switch, and boom, mirrored frog.
It's like something out of a science fiction movie. But what really struck me was that this trick, it only works early on in development, right? Like once that tadpole starts taking shape, no more organ flipping allowed.
Exactly. And that's actually a huge deal, scientifically speaking,
Yeah.
because it tells us there's this kind of decision point, a window of time where left and right are still like up in the air.
So even though we think of like our bodies being so complex, there are these moments where things are surprisingly flexible.
Exactly. Now we got to remember, VG1, it's just one piece of the puzzle here. It probably kicks off a whole chain reaction, signals telling other genes where to go, what to become. But even with millions of years of evolution supposedly perfecting this system,
Things can still get a little wonky.
it's true. Remember those frogs with the slightly out-of-place spleens I mentioned? Happens more than you'd think.
So even with the best laid plans, sometimes biology just does its own thing. Speaking of which, the next thing in this paper, it totally threw me for a loop. Like, we're talking microscopic level stuff here.
Let me guess. You're about to bring up those tiny gaps between cells.
You know it. Gap junctions, those little tunnels connecting neighboring cells. Turns out they're more important than we ever imagined.
It's wild, right? Those tiny gaps are crucial. Block them in a developing chicken embryo, for instance, and
You might end up with a chicken whose heart took a wrong turn.
you got it. Might end up with its heart on the right side instead of the left.
It's amazing to me that something so small could have such a huge impact. It's like a chain reaction, but on a cellular level.
It really shows you the incredible complexity of development. And honestly, it goes beyond just those physical connections. We're also talking about electricity.
Wait, hold on. Electricity? Like, are you saying my cells were sending each other emails before I was even born? How does that even work?
Not emails, no. But think of it this way. One side of a developing embryo is actually more electrically charged than the other.
Whoa, seriously. Okay, so for those of us who haven't cracked open a biology textbook lately, what does that even mean, electrically charged?
So basically, there's this tiny current running through the embryo. Ions, which are just electrically charged atoms, they move between cells. This flow of charge, we call it ion flow. It acts like a signal, providing directions during development.
So you're telling me that electrical currents are basically shaping our organs before we're even born? That's wild.
It is pretty wild, right? And get this whole electrical asymmetry thing, it's not just frogs and chickens. There's more and more evidence it might be happening in mammals, too, us included.
Okay, now I'm picturing, like, tiny little jumper cables in the womb. But seriously, that is incredible. It makes you wonder how much of our development is influenced by these forces we can't even see. But, we've journeyed from sea urchins to electrically charged embryos, so I think it's time to bring it back to us, What does all of this mean for humans?
I knew you were going to ask that. Ready to dive into some really fascinating but rare human conditions? Ever heard of cetus inversus?
Cetus inversa, yeah, it's like ringing a bell. Isn't that where someone's organs are basically mirrored?
Ding, ding, ding. You got it. It's this rare condition where everything that should be on the left is on the right and vice versa. And as crazy as it sounds, most people with cetus inversus, perfectly healthy.
Yeah.
Their bodies just work in reverse.
So their body just adapts to this mirrored layout. That's incredible. Talk about resilient, right? But, the paper also talks about things going wrong, doesn't it? Birth defects and stuff.
Yeah, you're right. Sadly, it's a lot more common to have a developmental error that's not as, clean as a complete flip.
What kind of errors are we talking?
Well, the heart's a big one. Really sensitive to those early hiccups in development. If something goes wrong when left and right are being decided, you can get all sorts of heart defects.
That's heavy stuff. Really highlights just how much has to go right in those first few weeks, doesn't it? But here's a curveball for you. You'd think a perfectly mirrored body would also mean a mirrored brain, right? But that's not always the case, is it?
Nope. And that's one of the surprising things about all this. Even when your organs are flipped, your brain asymmetry, often totally normal.
So you could have your heart on the right side of your body but still be left-brained? How does that even make sense?
$1 million question right there. It suggests that there might be two separate systems at play here, right? One for the body's left-right, another for the brain.
Okay, my brain is officially tied in knots now. I gotta say, though, for every answer we uncover, it seems like a dozen more questions pop up. Like, what about twins? If this left-right thing is so important, why aren't identical twins always mirror images of each other?
Twins. Always gotta love them, right? But you're right, it's a good question. And the thing is, some aspects of asymmetry, determined incredibly early, even before the embryo splits.
Like what? Give me an example.
Think about, which way your hair whirls, or even subtle differences in your fingerprints. Those can be mirror imaged in identical twins. It's like they're each other's reflections from the very beginning.
Wow, that's wild. It's like a built-in which twin am I tag.
Right. But then you've got organ asymmetry, which happens a bit later, like we've been talking about. And most of the time, identical twins develop normally. Hearts on the left, livers on the right, the whole 9 yards.
So what's happening there? Does the embryo, hit the reset button after it splits?
It's possible. One idea is that there's this really short window right after the embryo splits where those early asymmetry cues are still flexible. So even if one twin starts developing with a bias towards one side, the other twin has a chance to, course correct.
Fascinating. So the second twin is saying, hey, I see what you're doing over there, but I'm going my own way. Well, at least when it comes to my organs.
Something like that. But, twin studies are notorious for throwing curveballs. The paper mentions how one twin will have a birthmark on, say, their left side, and the other twin will have it on their left side, too.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it's like something is setting that very early asymmetry, but we still don't have a clue what it is.
Okay, now that is just mind-boggling. It seems like for everything we've learned about this, there are still a million mysteries lurking out there. But hey, we've covered a lot of ground here. And on that note, why don't we take a quick break, give our listeners a chance to process all of this mind-bending science. And we're back, still deep in the world of left and right, where, as it turns out, nothing is as simple as it seems.
Definitely not.
Okay, so far we've gone from ancient sea urchins to backward frogs, even to the idea that tiny electrical currents are shaping our organs before we're even born.
And we're not even close to covering it all.
Which is kind of exciting, right? I mean, there's still so much left to discover about this whole left-right thing.
Oh, absolutely. This field is just bursting with unanswered questions, waiting for someone to come along and untangle them.
But before we get lost in the weeds of all those genes and pathways, you hinted at some pretty big implications for this research, right? Things that go way beyond just understanding how embryos develop.
Absolutely. See, what's really groundbreaking about all of this is that it's not just about embryos. It's about how our organs, even in adults, know how to keep their unique shapes, their positions, everything.
Okay, I'm not sure I'm following. Can you give me an example?
Sure. Think about your lungs, for instance. Your left lung is different from your right lung.
Yeah, okay. The left one has one less lobe to make space for the heart, right?
Exactly. But here's the thing. Every single cell in your body, it's got the same DNA, the same instruction manual. So how does one lung know to be different from the other? How does it know where it is in relation to your heart and everything else?
It's like our cells have some kind of internal map, telling them not just what to become, but where to go in the first place.
That's a great way to put it. And that's where this research comes in. If we can understand how those early left-right signals work, how they're maintained throughout development, who knows? We could unlock some seriously cool stuff in fields like regenerative medicine, for example.
Now you're talking. I knew there had to be some big applications for all of this.
Imagine being able to grow replacement organs in the lab, but with the correct asymmetry already built in, ready to be transplanted.
So we're not just talking about flipping frogs anymore. We're talking about potentially changing the future of medicine.
Exactly. And that's just one example. This research could have huge implications for all sorts of things, from heart defects to even certain types of cancer.
Wow. Okay, so as we wrap up this incredible deep dive, what's the one big thing you want our listeners to take away from all of this?
I think the most important thing to remember is that left and right, they're not just arbitrary directions. They're fundamentally important to how our bodies are organized, how they work, even how our brains are wired.
It's like that old saying, location, 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 except in this case, it's asymmetry, asymmetry, asymmetry.
Exactly.
Well,
And the mechanisms that control all of this, they're ancient, they're complicated, and honestly, we're still just scratching the surface. But as we've seen today, scientists are making incredible progress, revealing the secrets of left and right, one experiment at a time.
it really makes you wonder what other hidden wonders are out there just waiting to be discovered in those everyday things we take for granted. Well, on that note, a huge thank you to you for guiding us through this incredible world of asymmetry. And to all of you listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep those questions coming, and until next time, stay curious.